The night Adrian Valente chose his bride, 3 men died before dawn. He didn't pull the trigger. He never did. But their blood painted a message across the city. Betrayal had a price, and he intended to collect. When the Mendez family thought they could trade a political marriage for power, they miscalculated. Adrian didn't negotiate. He conquered. Across the Atlantic, Elena Cruz stood in her family's crumbling estate, unaware that her brothers had just sold her freedom to save their own skins. She would fight, she would rage, but she would come to him anyway, because in Adrian's world, defiance only made the prize sweeter. Before we begin this story of power, obsession, and the dangerous line between hatred and desire, I invite you to stay until the very end. If this tale captivates you, please hit that like button and comment with your city below. I want to see how far Elena and Adrian's story reaches across the world. Now, let's step into the shadows where monsters are made and love is the most dangerous weapon of all. The Valente estate didn't look like a fortress. It looked like old money, the kind that whispered rather than shouted, that killed with signatures instead of bullets. But Adrian Valente knew better than anyone that elegance was just another form of armor. He stood in his study, a crystal tumbler of bourbon untouched in his hand, watching the city lights flicker through floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, New York pulsed with life, oblivious to the shift in power happening 40 stories above. His reflection stared back at him, sharp jaw, dark eyes that revealed nothing, the kind of face that made people look away instinctively. At 34, he'd built an empire that straddled the line between legitimate business and the underworld his grandfather had conquered decades ago. Tonight, that empire had nearly crumbled. "The bodies have been disposed of," Marco said from the doorway. His second in command, a man whose loyalty had been tested in blood more times than either of them could count. "Clean, no traces." Adrian didn't turn. "The Mendez family?" "Scrambling. Rafael's been calling every hour. Wants to meet." "Let him wait." Adrian's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Fear teaches better than conversation." Marco stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "The alliance was crucial, Adrian. Without the marriage to unite the families, the marriage will happen." Adrian finally turned, and something in his expression made Marco pause. "Just not with Rafael's sister." "Then who?" Adrian smiled, a cold, calculated expression that never reached his eyes. "The Cruz girl. Elena." The name hung in the air like smoke. Marco's surprise was evident, though he tried to hide it. "The Cruz family is barely holding on. What leverage do they? Her brothers are desperate. Desperate men make useful allies." Adrian moved to his desk, pulling out a file thick with intelligence reports. "Mateo and Santiago Cruz have been running their family business into the ground for 3 years. They're drowning in debt to the Bratva, the Triads, and half the loan sharks in Miami. They need protection. And you need a wife who comes from their world but brings no real power to challenge you," Marco said, understanding dawning. "Exactly." Adrian opened the file, revealing photographs of Elena Cruz. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost defiant. Dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, eyes that looked directly at the camera with something between challenge and contempt. The images showed her at charity galas, art gallery openings, always slightly apart from the crowd. She's educated, speaks 4 languages, runs a legitimate import business that's actually profitable, unlike her brother's ventures. On paper, she's perfect. And off paper? Adrian studied one particular photograph. Elena at what looked like a family gathering, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she stood between her brothers. Off paper, she's been trying to distance herself from her family for years. Moved to Barcelona. Built her own life. She won't come willingly. Then why choose her? The question was valid. Adrian could have any woman in New York with a phone call. Models, actresses, socialites who understood the game and would play their part without complaint. But something in Elena's photograph spoke to him. A steel beneath the beauty, a refusal to simply exist as decoration. "Because the Mendez family betrayed me," Adrian said quietly, his voice dropping to a register that made Marco unconsciously straighten. "They promised unity and delivered treachery. Rafael thought he could leverage our alliance to make moves against me within 6 months. His sister Maria knew. Their father orchestrated it." "You have proof?" Adrian's smile was sharp as broken glass. I have bodies. That's proof enough in our world. He closed the file with a decisive snap. The Mendez family wanted to use marriage as a weapon. So will I. But I'll forge my own alloy. The Cruz brothers get protection, their debts cleared, and legitimacy through connection to my empire. I get a wife with no divided loyalties and send a message to every family from here to Sicily. Cross me, and I'll take everything you thought was yours. Marco nodded slowly. When do we approach them? We don't. Adrian moved back to the window, watching an ambulance weave through traffic below, its lights silent from this height. We let them come to us. Santiago Cruz is 3 weeks from defaulting on a loan that will cost him his kneecaps if he's lucky, his life if he's not. When he's desperate enough, when he's exhausted every other option, someone will whisper my name. Someone will suggest the unthinkable, that Adrian Valente might be interested in an arrangement. And if Elena refuses? Adrian's reflection in the glass showed no emotion. Her refusal is already priced in. She'll fight, she'll rage, she'll hate me with every fiber of her being. He paused, something almost like anticipation flickering in his chest. That's precisely the point. I don't need another empty socialite who sees me as a meal ticket. I need someone strong enough to stand beside me when the next war comes. And it will come, Marco. The Mendez family won't accept this insult quietly. You're courting war to prevent war? I'm courting dominance. Adrian turned, his eyes hard. In 3 months, I want every family in North America to understand that challenging me doesn't just fail. It costs you everything you value most. Rafael Mendez was going to marry his way into my empire. Instead, I'll marry the woman meant for him and make him watch from the ashes of his ambitions. The cruelty of it was elegant in its simplicity, personal enough to wound, strategic enough to strengthen his position. Marco had been with Adrian long enough to recognize the calculation behind every decision, but this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. You know the girl could become a liability, Marco said carefully. If she truly hates you, if she finds allies, then I'll have underestimated her, and I'll deal with the consequences. Adrian's tone suggested the conversation was ending. But I don't think I have. Elena Cruz has spent years trying to escape her family's shadow. She built something real in Barcelona, small, but hers. She values independence above everything else. Taking that from her will hurt more than any physical cage could. That's the point? To hurt her? Adrian considered the question longer than Marco expected. The point is to forge something stronger than mere alliance. Fear, respect, even hatred. These are bonds that don't break easily. They're honest, clean. Love makes people weak, makes them vulnerable. But a partnership built on clear-eyed understanding of power? That's unbreakable. What Adrian didn't say, what he barely admitted to himself as he stared at Elena's photograph one more time before closing it in his desk drawer, was that something about her defiant gaze called to a part of him he'd buried years ago. The part that remembered being 17 and powerless, watching his father die from a betrayal he couldn't prevent. The part that understood what it meant to be caged by family, by expectation, by a world that saw you as a piece to be moved rather than a person with agency. He crushed that sentiment before it could fully form. Sentiment was weakness. Elena Cruz was strategy. Nothing more. Make the calls, he told Marco. Quiet ones. Let it be known that I'm interested in expanding my connections to Miami. Plant the seeds. When Santiago comes crawling, I want him to think it was his idea. Marco left without another word, leaving Adrian alone with the city lights and his bourbon. He finally took a sip, letting the burn ground him in the present. Somewhere across the Atlantic, Elena Cruz was living her last days of freedom. She didn't know it yet, but her life had just been bought and sold in a conversation she wasn't part of. Adrian wondered if she would thank him eventually for freeing her from the slow death of her brother's failures, for giving her a position of power even if it came wrapped in chains. Probably not. Good. He didn't want gratitude. He wanted fire that wouldn't extinguish under pressure. The city below continued its oblivious dance. In 48 hours, 3 families would understand that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. In 2 weeks, Santiago Cruz would make a phone call that would seal his sister's fate. And in 1 month, Elena Cruz would stand in this very room and look at Adrian Valente with murder in her eyes. He was counting on it. 3 weeks later, Barcelona, Spain. Elena Cruz stood in her gallery, sunlight streaming through the converted warehouse's industrial windows, and felt genuinely happy for the first time in months. The space smelled of fresh paint and possibility. White walls waiting for the emerging artists she'd been cultivating. Polished concrete floors that echoed with potential rather than emptiness. The installation pieces should arrive tomorrow, her assistant, Sophia, said, checking her tablet. And we have confirmations from all 3 of the artists you wanted for the opening. This is really happening, Elena. It was really happening. After 3 years of building her import business to the point of stability, Elena had finally saved enough to pursue her actual passion, creating a space for Latin American artists who struggled to break into European markets. The gallery wasn't large, wasn't in the most fashionable district, but it was hers. Every euro she'd invested came from her own work, untainted by her family's increasingly questionable business dealings. Her phone buzzed. Mateo. Again. Elena ignored it, as she'd been ignoring her older brother's calls for the past week. Whatever crisis had befallen the Cruz family empire this time, she wasn't interested. She'd made that clear when she'd moved to Barcelona, when she'd started using her mother's maiden name for her business, when she'd stopped attending the obligatory family gatherings that always felt more like hostile board meetings than reunions. Sophia's expression shifted to concern. You should probably... No. Elena's tone was gentle but firm. I'm done being my brother's solution to their problems. They made their choices. I made mine. But the phone kept buzzing, and when it finally stopped, it started again immediately, then again. The insistence of it sent a chill down Elena's spine, some instinct inherited from her father. The one who'd built the Cruz empire before Mateo and Santiago had started dismantling it through arrogance and poor decisions. I'll be right back, Elena said, stepping into her office and closing the door. She answered on the next ring. Mateo, I'm working. Thank God. Her brother's voice was ragged, desperate in a way that made Elena's stomach clench. Elena, I need you to listen, please. Just listen. What happened? Despite everything, despite the distance she'd tried to create, family was still family, and Mateo sounded genuinely terrified. It's Santiago. He took a loan, a big one, from people who don't negotiate payment plans. Elena closed her eyes, familiar anger washing over her. How much? 3 million, due in 2 weeks. We thought, we had a deal coming through that would cover it, but it fell apart. Elena, these people, they're not businessmen. I know what they are. She'd grown up in that world, had spent her childhood learning to read the difference between legitimate partners and the ones who left bodies in their wake. Why are you calling me? I don't have that kind of money. My business is legitimate, Mateo. I can't just... We have a solution. He said it too quickly, the words rehearsed. A real one. But we need you to come home, just for a few days, to Miami. We need to discuss it as a family. Every instinct Elena had screamed danger. What kind of solution? The kind we can't discuss over the phone. Mateo's voice dropped. Please, Elena. I know we haven't been the brothers you deserved. I know we've made mistakes, but Santiago's life is on the line. Literally. These people will kill him. They'll kill all of us. Please. Elena stared at the gallery visible through her office window. Her dream made concrete, her escape made real. Going back to Miami, even for a few days, felt like regression, like surrendering ground she'd fought for. But Santiago, for all his flaws, was still her baby brother. 5 years younger, always the one who'd tried to make her smile during their father's rages, who'd snuck her books when their father had declared literature a waste of time for a girl who should focus on being marriageable. 3 days, she said finally. I'll give you 3 days. But Mateo, if this solution involves me marrying some associate or playing hostess to criminals, I'm walking away. Do you understand? I'm done with that life. I understand. But there was something in his voice, relief mixed with guilt, that made her wonder what she'd just agreed to. Thank you, Elena. I'll send the plane. You'll be safe. I promise. The call ended, leaving Elena staring at her reflection in the office window. Dark eyes that looked too much like her father's stared back, full of doubt and determination in equal measure. She'd sworn she was done with Miami, done with the Cruz family business, done with the world where women were assets to be managed rather than people with agency. But family was a chain that never fully broke, no matter how far you ran. Elena booked Sophia to manage the gallery in her absence, packed a small bag with clothes appropriate for Miami's humidity and her family's expectations, and tried to ignore the growing dread in her chest. 3 days. She would listen to whatever desperate plan her brothers had concocted, explain calmly why she couldn't help, and return to Barcelona with her conscience clear. The universe, she would learn, had other plans. Miami, the Cruz estate. The house Elena had grown up in looked smaller than she remembered. Or perhaps she'd just grown larger, more herself, less the frightened girl who'd walked these halls trying to be invisible. The Spanish colonial architecture seemed dated now, the grandeur faded at the edges like old photographs. Mateo met her at the door. Her oldest brother looked like he'd aged a decade in the 3 years since she'd seen him. New lines around his eyes, gray threading through his dark hair. He tried to hug her, but Elena kept it brief, professional. "Where's Santiago?" she asked. "Inside, with our guest." Mateo's expression was carefully neutral. "Elena, before you see him, I need you to understand—" "Who's here, Mateo?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then simply gestured toward the study. "It's better if you hear it from all of us." The dread that had been building since Barcelona crystallized into certainty. Whatever was happening, it was worse than she'd imagined. Elena followed her brother through the house, her heels clicking on tile that needed replacing, past furniture that had been expensive once but now just looked tired. The study door was open. Santiago stood by the window, his young face drawn with stress. And seated in their father's old chair, looking perfectly at ease in a space that should have been hostile territory, was a man Elena didn't recognize but instinctively understood. Power. That's what she saw first. Not the tailored suit that probably cost more than her monthly gallery rent, not the handsome face that could have belonged to a model if not for the predatory stillness in his eyes. Just power, concentrated and controlled, wrapped in human form. "Elena." Santiago moved toward her, but she held up a hand, stopping him. Her eyes never left the stranger. "Who are you?" The man stood with fluid grace, and Elena registered his height, easily 6'2", built like someone who understood violence intimately. "Adrian Valente, your brothers have told me a great deal about you." The name meant nothing to her, but the way Mateo and Santiago reacted, the way they seemed to shrink slightly in his presence, told her everything she needed to know. This was the solution. This man, with his cold eyes and colder smile, was how her brothers intended to save themselves. "Get out," Elena said quietly. Adrian's eyebrows rose fractionally. "I'm sorry?" "You heard me." She turned to her brothers, fury building in her chest like a wave. "Whatever deal you think you're making, whatever you've promised this man, I'm not part of it. I told you, Mateo. I'm done." "Elena, please," Santiago started. "No." Her voice cracked like a whip. "I came home because you said your life was in danger. I came because I'm not heartless enough to let you die for your stupidity, but I will not be sold like livestock to clean up your mess." "Sold?" Adrian spoke the word thoughtfully, as if tasting it. Such a crude term for what I'm proposing. Elena finally looked directly at him, meeting those dark eyes without flinching. "And what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Valente?" "A marriage." He said it simply, as if discussing a stock purchase. "Legal, binding, and beneficial to all parties involved. Your brothers receive protection, their debts cleared, and access to resources that will stabilize their business interests. You receive security, status, and everything you could want, within reason. Except freedom. Freedom is overrated." Adrian moved closer and Elena fought the urge to step back. "You've been running for 3 years, Elena. Running from your family, from your heritage, from the reality of who you are. I'm offering you a chance to stop running, to embrace your position and wield real power instead of pretending you can escape your bloodline by selling art in Barcelona." The casual dismissal of everything she'd built ignited something dangerous in Elena's chest. "You know nothing about me. I know you're 28 years old. and still trying to prove something to a dead father who never valued you anyway. Adrian's voice was clinical, precise. I know you speak Spanish, English, Portuguese, and French. I know you graduated top of your class in art history and business, that you could have worked anywhere but chose the smallest possible stage because you were afraid of being consumed by something larger. I know you're brave enough to defy your family, but not brave enough to truly leave them behind. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here right now. Each word landed like a blade. Elena felt stripped bare, exposed. How dare you? I dare because I own the truth. Adrian was close enough now that she could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, could smell expensive cologne mixed with something sharper, danger maybe, or just absolute confidence. Your brothers came to me. They offered you as collateral for their lives. I could have demanded anything, silent obedience, complete submission, a decoration for my arm and nothing more. Instead, I'm offering you a partnership. Partnership. Elena laughed, sharp and bitter. That's what you call forcing someone into marriage? I call it reality. Adrian's expression didn't change. Your brothers will die without my intervention. You know this. The people they owe don't negotiate. They collect in blood. I can stop that with a phone call. All it costs is you. All it costs is my entire life. Your life was already spoken for. His voice dropped lower, almost intimate. The moment your brothers started making deals they couldn't keep, the moment they tied the crew's name to debts that would bury them. You were always going to pay for their failures, Elena. I'm just offering you a chance to pay on your terms. These aren't my terms. Then name yours. Adrian stepped back, giving her space, his demeanor shifting to something almost like respect. Tell me what you want. What would make this arrangement tolerable for you? Elena stared at him, searching for manipulation, for the angle. But his expression was genuinely curious, as if her answer actually mattered. Behind her, she could feel her brothers holding their breath, waiting. I want my gallery, she said finally, in Barcelona, funded and protected. I want autonomy over my schedule, my work, my life. I want a prenuptial agreement that guarantees I walk away with my independence if this falls apart. And I want your word that my brothers will never use me as leverage again. Adrian considered each demand, his face unreadable. Then he nodded once. Done. With one addition. Of course there's an addition. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You will fulfill the duties expected of a wife in my world. Public appearances, certain social obligations, presenting a united front when necessary. But in private, you'll have the space you require. I'm not interested in a prisoner, Elena. I'm interested in a partner strong enough to stand in the fire with me. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why me? You could have anyone. Why choose someone who will fight you every step of the way? Adrian's eyes gleamed with something that might have been anticipation. Because anyone else would bore me within a month. You'll keep me honest, keep me sharp. And when the knives come, and they will come, I need someone beside me who knows how to cut back. It was the most honest thing he'd said, and somehow that made it more terrifying. This wasn't about love or even desire. This was about strategy, about finding the right weapon for the right war. And Adrian Valente had decided Elena was that weapon. She turned to her brothers, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. Mateo wouldn't meet her eyes. Santiago looked like he might cry. They had sold her, not out of malice, but out of desperation, and the same selfishness that had defined their choices for years. I hate you both, she said quietly, for putting me in this position, for making me choose between my freedom and your lives. I will never forgive this. Elena, Mateo started, but I'll do it. She cut him off, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. I'll marry him. I'll save you one last time, and then you will never ask me for anything again. Do you understand? I'm done being your solution. The relief on their faces was almost nauseating. Elena looked back at Adrian, who watched the entire exchange with clinical interest, as if studying a specimen. I'll need everything in writing, she told him. The prenup, the agreement about my gallery, all of it. I want lawyers who aren't on your payroll. Agreed. Adrian extended his hand. Do we have a deal? Elena stared at his hand, strong, scarred across the knuckles, belonging to a man who'd built an empire on violence and strategy. Taking it meant surrendering the life she'd carefully constructed. Refusing it meant watching her brothers die and living with that choice forever. She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and somehow felt like a shackle closing around her wrist. "We have a deal," she said. "But understand this, Mr. Valente. I will never be yours. Not really. You can have my name, my presence, whatever public show you require, but you will never have me." Adrian's smile was slow, dangerous, and somehow appreciative. "We'll see, Elena Cruz. We'll see." As their hands remained clasped, sealed in an agreement neither of them could fully understand the consequences of yet, Elena felt the future crystallize. This wasn't a fairy tale. There would be no rescue, no magical escape. This was a transaction that would bind her to a man who viewed human beings as chess pieces and power as the only currency that mattered. But if Adrian Valente thought she would simply surrender to her fate, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he'd been about who he was dealing with. The war between them had just begun. The flight to New York happened so quickly that Elena barely had time to process what she'd agreed to. One moment she was standing in her family's study, her hand still warm from Adrian's grip, and the next she was being ushered into a private car, then onto a jet that made her brother's occasional chartered flights look like budget airlines. Adrian sat across from her in the cabin, working on a laptop as if he hadn't just acquired a wife through what amounted to a business transaction. Elena watched him, studying the man who would legally own her in less than a week. His focus was absolute, eyes scanning documents, fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. He hadn't spoken to her since they'd left Miami, hadn't acknowledged her presence beyond a brief gesture toward the seat she now occupied. "Do you always ignore the people you've just coerced into marriage?" Elena asked finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. Adrian's eyes lifted from the screen, and she saw a flicker of amusement there. "I'm working. You're free to do the same, or sleep, or drink. There's a full bar. You're not a prisoner, Elena. Aren't I?" "No." He closed the laptop with a soft click. "A prisoner has no choices. You made yours. Now you're living with the consequences, just like everyone else in the world." Elena leaned forward, anger giving her courage. "You manipulated the situation. You knew exactly what pressure points to exploit." "Yes." Adrian didn't even pretend to deny it. "That's what intelligent people do. They assess a situation, identify leverage, and use it to achieve their objectives. You would have done the same in my position." "I would never, wouldn't you?" He tilted his head, studying her with those unsettling dark eyes. "If someone threatened your gallery, threatened everything you'd built, and you had the power to stop them by making a strategic alliance, you're telling me you wouldn't consider it?" Elena opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Because he was right, and they both knew it. She would have fought with everything she had to protect what mattered to her. Adrian had simply fought with more resources and fewer scruples. "The difference," she said carefully, "is that I wouldn't pretend it was anything other than what it is. You talk about partnership and standing in fire together, but we both know this is about control, about you winning whatever game you're playing with the people who crossed you." Something shifted in Adrian's expression, not quite approval, but close. "You're smarter than your brothers gave you credit for. Yes, this serves my purposes beyond simply acquiring a wife. The Mendez family thought they could outmaneuver me. Taking you sends a message about the price of betrayal." "So I'm a message." Elena's voice was flat, empty. "A statement written in someone else's life." "You're a lot of things." Adrian stood, moving to the bar and pouring 2 glasses of wine without asking if she wanted one. "A message, yes, but also a legitimate partner in building something larger than either of us individually. The families that matter will see our union as a consolidation of power between New York and Miami. They'll have to recalculate their positions, their alliances. That creates opportunities." He handed her a glass. Elena took it but didn't drink, watching as he settled into the seat beside her instead of across from her. Close enough that she could feel the heat of him, smell that expensive cologne mixed with something else. Leather, maybe, or just the scent of controlled danger. "And what do I get from these opportunities?" she asked. "Besides the gallery you've already agreed to fund. Access." Adrian swirled his wine, eyes distant, as if seeing possibilities she couldn't yet imagine. You think you know the art world, Elena? You've been playing in the shallow end. The real collectors, the ones who shape culture and move markets, they exist in circles you couldn't touch from Barcelona. But as my wife, you'll have access to private collections that would make your gallery artists weep. You'll have the resources to do more than showcase emerging talent. You'll have the power to make or break careers. Elena hated that the offer tempted her, hated that part of her brain was already calculating what she could accomplish with that kind of access, that level of legitimacy. And all it costs is my soul. Your soul was already compromised the moment you were born a Cruz. Adrian's voice was matter-of-fact, not cruel. You can pretend you escaped that by running to Europe, by using your mother's name. But blood doesn't wash off that easily. I'm not corrupting you, Elena. I'm just being honest about what you already are. And what am I? He turned to look at her fully, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. A woman who understands that power and morality rarely occupy the same space. A woman who's been pretending to be softer than she is because that's what the world told her to be. You want to know what I see when I look at you? Elena wasn't sure she did, but she nodded anyway. I see someone who's been caged by expectations. Your father's, your brother's, society's. Someone who built a smaller life than she was capable of because anything larger felt like becoming the thing she hated. Adrian set his wine down, his attention completely focused on her. But you can't cage fire forever, Elena. Eventually it burns through whatever's containing it. I'm offering you a bigger cage, one with room to breathe, to grow, to become what you could have been if you'd been born into a different family. That's not freedom. No, he agreed. But it's more freedom than you had, and significantly more than you would have had if I'd left your brothers to their fate. The truth of it settled over Elena like a weight. She had never been free, not really. Even in Barcelona, she'd been running from something rather than running toward anything. Her gallery, her carefully constructed independence, it had all been an elaborate denial of the fundamental reality that she was still her father's daughter, still connected to a world where debts were paid in blood and family ties were chains you wore until death. When is the wedding? She asked finally, surrendering to the inevitable. 4 days. Small ceremony, immediate family only. I see no reason to make a spectacle of it. 4 days. Elena laughed, sharp and bitter. Most people get months to plan a wedding. Most people are marrying for love. We're marrying for survival and strategy. The timeline is irrelevant. Adrian paused, then added with something that might have been consideration. If there are specific things you want, flowers, music, whatever matters to brides, I can arrange them. Within reason. How generous. But Elena found herself considering it anyway. If she was going to be forced into this, she could at least control the aesthetics. White roses. Classical guitar, not organ. And I want the ceremony in English and Spanish both. If I'm representing the Cruz family in this transaction, I want that acknowledged. Adrian nodded, pulling out his phone and typing notes. Done. Anything else? My dress. I choose it. No input from you or anyone else. I wouldn't dream of interfering with a woman's wedding dress. There was something almost like humor in his voice. Though I should mention the budget is effectively unlimited. Don't restrict yourself based on price. Elena stared at him, trying to reconcile the man who spoke so casually about unlimited budgets with the man who had essentially purchased her from her brothers. Do you actually care what I wear? I care that you look like you belong at my side. Adrian met her eyes directly. Aesthetics matter in our world, Elena. They communicate power, confidence, legitimacy. You could show up in burlap and I'd still marry you, but you'd be doing yourself a disservice. These people will judge you on appearance first, substance second. Give them nothing to criticize. It was practical advice delivered without condescension. Elena realized with some surprise that Adrian seemed to actually want her to succeed in her new role, even if his motivations were entirely selfish. A weak wife would reflect poorly on him. A strong one, even one who hated him, would enhance his position. I'll need a credit card, she said, and access to designers in New York. I assume we're staying there. My penthouse, 62nd floor, Central Park views. You'll have your own suite until after the wedding. He pulled a black credit card from his wallet and handed it to her. No limit. Use it for the dress, for anything else you need. Consider it a wedding gift. Elena took the card, feeling the weight of it. Heavy metal, her name already embossed on it. Elena Cruz Valente. She hadn't even agreed to take his name yet, but apparently that decision had been made for her as well. I want to keep Cruz, she said suddenly. Elena Cruz Valente, hyphenated. My family might be dysfunctional, but they're still mine. I won't erase them completely. Adrian considered this, and she braced for an argument, but he just shrugged. Acceptable. It actually reinforces the alliance narrative. Use whichever name suits the situation. The ease of his agreement surprised her. Elena had expected more fight, more demands for complete submission. Instead, Adrian seemed content to give ground on things that didn't directly threaten his control. It was a strategy, she realized. Let her win small battles so she'd be more compliant on larger ones. I won't share your bed, she said, testing how far his flexibility extended. Adrian's expression didn't change. After the wedding, we'll maintain the appearance of a normal marriage publicly. What happens privately is negotiable. I'm not interested in forcing intimacy where none exists. Then why marry at all? You could have just paid off my brother's debts, demanded loyalty some other way. Because marriage is binding in ways that simple agreements aren't. Adrian leaned back, studying her like she was a puzzle to be solved. It creates legal entanglements, shared interests, a public commitment that's difficult to break without consequences. Your brothers could have betrayed a business arrangement. They're significantly less likely to betray a blood connection through their sister. So I'm collateral. Your insurance. His correction was precise. There's a difference. Collateral gets used up and discarded. Insurance protects both parties as long as the agreement holds. Elena wanted to argue, to find the flaw in his logic, but she couldn't. Everything Adrian said made perfect sense from a strategic standpoint. It was only from a human standpoint, from the perspective of someone who wanted agency and choice and the possibility of love, that his reasoning fell apart. What happens if I run? She asked quietly. After the wedding, what happens if I just disappear? Adrian's eyes went cold, and for the first time since they'd met, Elena saw the full weight of the man beneath the civilized surface. Then our agreement becomes void. Your brother's protection evaporates. Their debts come due. And I demonstrate to everyone watching exactly what happens when someone breaks a contract with me. You'd kill them. I wouldn't have to. Adrian's voice was soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. The people they owe would do it for me. Slowly. Painfully. And you would have to live with the knowledge that your freedom cost their lives. Could you do that, Elena? Could you build your art gallery on a foundation of your brother's bones? The image was visceral, horrifying. Elena felt bile rise in her throat. You're a monster. Yes. Adrian didn't flinch from the accusation. But I'm a monster who keeps his word. Stay, honor our agreement, and I'll protect your family. I'll fund your gallery. I'll give you the space to build something meaningful. Run, and I'll burn everything you care about to the ground. The choice, as always, is yours. Elena turned away, staring out the window at clouds that looked solid enough to walk on. She thought she understood what she was agreeing to in Miami, but this crystallized the reality in ways that made her chest tight. She wasn't marrying a man. She was binding herself to a force of nature, something that operated by its own logic and couldn't be reasoned with or escaped from. The rest of the flight passed in silence. Adrian returned to his work, and Elena pretended to sleep, her mind racing through scenarios and possibilities. Every escape route she imagined ended with someone she loved paying the price. Every rebellion she could conceive came with consequences that extended beyond herself. By the time they landed in New York, Elena had accepted a fundamental truth. She was trapped. Not by physical chains or locked doors, but by something more insidious, responsibility, guilt, and the love she couldn't quite kill for brothers who'd betrayed her. The city that greeted them was nothing like Miami. New York moved faster, harder, with an energy that felt almost aggressive. Adrian's car met them at a private terminal, a sleek black SUV with windows tinted so dark Elena couldn't see out properly. The driver, a massive man with scars on his knuckles and eyes that never stopped moving, loaded their bags without a word. That's Victor, Adrian said as they settled into the back seat. Head of my security team. Anything you need that I can't provide, he can. Elena glanced at Victor's reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked like he could snap her in half without breaking a sweat. I need a bodyguard? You need protection. Adrian's tone suggested there was a difference. You're about to become one of the most valuable targets in New York, Elena. Every enemy I've made, every rival looking for leverage, you represent opportunity. Victor and his team will keep you safe. How comforting. But Elena's sarcasm faltered as the reality sank in. She hadn't just agreed to marry Adrian Valente. She'd agreed to enter a world where her life had value only as a bargaining chip, where every interaction could be a threat. And if I want to go somewhere, the gallery, shopping, anywhere, you tell Victor. He coordinates with my schedule and the security team. If I clear it, you go. If I don't, you stay. Elena's hands clenched in her lap. So I am a prisoner. Adrian sighed, and for the first time he sounded almost tired. You're a woman entering a war zone, Elena. The rules aren't designed to control you. They're designed to keep you alive. Rafael Mendez isn't going to take our marriage quietly. His pride won't allow it. And there are others, families and organizations that will see our union as a shift in the balance of power. Some will want to ally with us. Others will want to test our strength. Until the dust settles, until everyone understands that touching you means dying, you need protection. And how long will that take? Months? Maybe a year. Adrian's expression was grim. Welcome to my world, Elena. It's not pretty, but it's honest. No one here pretends to be civilized. We're all just monsters wearing expensive suits. The penthouse, when they finally arrived, was everything Elena expected and nothing she wanted. 62nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. The space was beautiful in the way that glaciers were beautiful, cold, pristine, untouchable. Your suite is through there. Adrian gestured to a hallway. Bedroom, bathroom, walk-in closet, sitting room, everything you need. My suite is on the opposite side of the penthouse. We share the main living spaces, kitchen, dining room, the library. Elena walked through the indicated door and found herself in what amounted to a luxury apartment within the apartment. The bedroom alone was larger than her entire Barcelona flat. The bathroom had a tub big enough to swim in. The closet was empty except for a few items that were clearly new, robes, slippers, basic clothing in her size. How did you know my sizes? She called out. Adrian appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with casual elegance. I make it my business to know everything about the people who matter to me. Your dress size is 6, shoes are 7.5. You prefer silver jewelry to gold, contemporary art to classical, and you take your coffee black with 1 sugar. The level of detail was invasive and somehow flattering in equal measure. You had me investigated. Thoroughly. Adrian didn't apologize. I don't make billion-dollar decisions without research. And make no mistake, you're an investment. I needed to know what I was acquiring. I'm not a company you bought. No. His eyes traveled over her, assessing in a way that made her skin prickle. You're significantly more complicated than a company, and potentially more valuable if you play your role correctly. Elena turned away, examining the closet because it was easier than looking at him. When do I meet your family? You don't. The flatness in his voice made her turn back. My father is dead. My mother lives in Italy and we don't speak. I have a younger sister, Sophia, but she's not involved in the business. This marriage is about my interests, not family approval. There was a story there, pain buried deep beneath the clinical detachment. Elena filed it away, a small crack in the armor she might be able to exploit later. So no one will object to you marrying a stranger? The people whose opinions matter already know. Marco, my second, approves of the strategic value. The board of my legitimate businesses will see it as positive networking. And the families who operate in the shadows? Adrian smiled without warmth. They'll understand exactly what this marriage means, and they'll adjust their positions accordingly. A phone buzzed. Adrian pulled it out, read something that made his jaw tighten. I need to handle something. Victor will be outside if you need anything. Don't leave the penthouse without him. Where are you going? To remind someone why they should have stayed in their lane. Adrian was already moving toward the door. I'll be back before dinner. We'll discuss the wedding details then. He was gone before Elena could respond, leaving her alone in a gilded cage 62 stories above a city that suddenly felt very hostile. She moved to the windows, looking down at Central Park spread out like a green sanctuary in the concrete jungle. People moved through it like ants, oblivious to the woman watching from above, trapped in luxury she'd never asked for. Elena pressed her palm against the glass, feeling the coolness of it, imagining she could feel the city's pulse through the barrier. 4 days until the wedding. 4 days until she legally bound herself to a man who saw her as strategy, as insurance, as investment. 4 days to figure out how to survive in a world where power was the only currency and love was a liability she couldn't afford. Her reflection stared back at her, dark hair, dark eyes, her mother's delicate features overlaid on her father's stubborn jawline. She looked like a woman on the edge of something, balanced between who she'd been and who she was being forced to become. "I won't break," she told her reflection. "Whatever he thinks he's bought, whatever game he thinks he's playing, I won't break." But even as she said it, Elena wondered if she was lying to herself. Because Adrian Valente didn't seem interested in breaking her. He seemed interested in something far more dangerous, transforming her into a weapon he could wield, forging her in the same fires that had made him. And the terrifying part, the part Elena couldn't quite acknowledge yet, was that some small piece of her wanted to see what she would become in those flames. Wanted to know if she was as strong as Adrian seemed to believe, or if she was just another woman who would shatter under pressure she'd never been built to withstand. The city sprawled beneath her, beautiful and brutal in the fading light. Somewhere out there, Rafael Mendez was plotting revenge. Somewhere, her brothers were breathing easier, bought and paid for by her sacrifice. And somewhere in this massive penthouse, Adrian Valente was making calls and moving pieces on a board she couldn't fully see yet. Elena turned from the window and began unpacking her small bag. Each item she placed in the cavernous closet, feeling like another admission of surrender. Tomorrow she would find a designer for her wedding dress. Tomorrow she would start learning the rules of Adrian's world. Tomorrow she would begin the process of becoming Elena Cruz Valente. But tonight, in the privacy of her borrowed suite, she allowed herself one moment of grief for the life she was leaving behind. For the gallery in Barcelona that would exist without her daily presence. For the freedom she'd fought so hard to claim. For the future she'd imagined that would never happen now. Tomorrow, she would be steel. But tonight, just for tonight, Elena let herself be fragile. The fragility didn't last long. Elena woke the next morning with the kind of clarity that only comes after a night spent wrestling with impossible choices. She'd made her decision in Miami, and spending energy on regret would only weaken her position. If she was going to survive Adrian's world, she needed to understand it, to map its contours, and identify where she could carve out space for herself. She found him in the kitchen, dressed in dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, reading something on his tablet while drinking espresso. The domestic normalcy of the scene was jarring, as if a predator had decided to cosplay as a regular human having breakfast. "There's coffee," Adrian said without looking up. "And food, if you're hungry. I wasn't sure what you'd want, so I had everything stocked." Elena poured herself a cup, adding one sugar exactly as he'd known she would, hating that he'd been right about even that small detail. "We need to discuss the prenuptial agreement." "Already drafted." Adrian slid a thick document across the counter. "Your lawyers can review it today if you want. I've allocated office space in the building for them to work." Elena flipped through the pages, scanning terms that seemed almost too generous. The gallery funding was outlined in detail, complete with operational budgets and expansion clauses. Her personal accounts would remain separate. In the event of divorce, she would receive a settlement substantial enough to ensure she never needed to rely on anyone again. "This is more than we agreed to," she said carefully, looking for the trap. "Consider it incentive." Adrian finally met her eyes. "The more successful you are, the stronger our alliance appears. I gain nothing by keeping you dependent or desperate. Independence suits you, Elena. I have no interest in crushing it. Just redirecting it." "Exactly." He smiled, and it was the first genuine expression she'd seen from him. "You'll learn that I'm quite practical about these things. Resentful, broken partners are liabilities. Empowered ones are assets. Which would you prefer to be?" Elena studied the document again, her legal training from her business degree helping her parse the language. Everything seemed legitimate, almost shockingly fair given the circumstances. What's the catch? No catch, just reality. Adrian stood, moving around the counter until he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. You honor the marriage publicly, you fulfill your obligations, and you get everything outlined in that contract. You betray me, you run, you do anything that damages my interests, and the agreement becomes void. Simple cause and effect. You make it sound so reasonable. It is reasonable. His hand came up, and Elena forced herself not to flinch as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was oddly intimate, possessive. I'm not your enemy, Elena. I'm the person standing between you and a world that would devour you without a second thought. The sooner you accept that, the easier this becomes. Elena stepped back, breaking the contact. Don't touch me like that. Like what? Like you have the right. Like this is real. Her voice was sharper than she intended. We can pretend in public, but here, in private, I need boundaries. I need something that's still mine. Adrian considered this, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. Fair enough. But Elena, those boundaries work both ways. You want space, I'll give it. But when I need you to play your role, when I need you standing beside me looking like you chose to be there, I expect perfection. Can you do that? I survived 28 years in a world that wanted me to be decorative and silent. I think I can manage to smile on command. Good. Adrian checked his watch, a sleek piece that probably cost more than most cars. I have meetings all day. Victor will take you wherever you need to go for the dress. I've arranged appointments at 3 design houses. Use whichever one you prefer, or all 3 if you can't decide. The wedding planner will contact you this afternoon about the ceremony details. You hired a wedding planner for a marriage neither of us wants. I hired a wedding planner because I don't have time to coordinate flowers and music, and neither do you. Adrian grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair. Like I said, Elena, aesthetics matter. This wedding will be photographed, discussed, analyzed. We give them nothing to criticize. He was gone before she could respond, leaving Elena alone with her coffee and a prenuptial agreement that was somehow more disturbing for being fair than it would have been if it were exploitative. She spent the next hour reading every clause, every subclause, looking for hidden traps. But Adrian had been honest. The agreement protected both of them, outlined expectations clearly, and provided her with genuine financial security. It was the security that bothered her most, because it meant Adrian expected this to last, expected her to settle into this role and make it real. The prenup wasn't designed for a short-term arrangement. It was structured for a lifetime. Victor knocked precisely at 9. Mrs. Valente, the car is ready? It's Cruz, Elena corrected automatically. Or Cruz Valente, if you must. But not just Valente. Not yet. The big man's expression didn't change. Yes, ma'am. The car is ready when you are. The first design house was in Soho, all exposed brick and avant-garde aesthetics. The designer, a rail-thin woman named Margot, descended on Elena like a predator who'd spotted wounded prey. Adrian called personally, Margot said, circling Elena with an assessing eye that missed nothing. He said you have exquisite taste and complete autonomy over the design. That's rare for his type of arrangement. Elena heard the judgment in her voice, the assumption that she was just another trophy being polished for display. What exactly do you think you know about our arrangement? Margot had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I apologize, that was inappropriate. Let's focus on making you the most beautiful bride in New York, shall we? They spent 2 hours looking at designs, discussing fabrics and cuts, and the silhouette Elena wanted to project. Margot was talented, her sketches translating Elena's vague ideas into concrete possibilities. But something felt off, too modern, too aggressive. These were dresses designed to make statements, and Elena wasn't sure what statement she wanted to make yet. The second design house was in Midtown, more traditional, all white marble and hushed reverence. The designer, an older man named Sebastian, took one look at Elena and immediately began pulling dresses that were soft, romantic, absolutely wrong. No, Elena said, cutting him off mid-pitch about Chantilly lace. Nothing that makes me look fragile. Nothing that suggests I'm some delicate flower being protected. Sebastian frowned. But for a first wedding, most brides want... I'm not most brides. Elena's voice was flat. Show me something with structure. With strength. I need to look like I chose this, like I belong in Adrian Valente's world, not like I'm being absorbed into it. Understanding dawned in Sebastian's eyes. Ah, I see. Give me 15 minutes. He returned with a completely different selection. Dresses with architectural elements, strong shoulders, clean lines. Better, but still not quite right. Elena was beginning to think she'd have to settle for something that was merely acceptable when Victor's phone buzzed. Third appointment is ready, ma'am, he said. Designer's name is Isabel Moreau. Mr. Valente said to save her for last. The third house was in the Diamond District, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. The showroom was intimate, elegant without being ostentatious. And Isabel Moreau was nothing like Elena expected. Mid-50s, sharp eyes, the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Elena Cruz, Isabel said, extending her hand. Adrian told me you would be interesting. He rarely calls in favors, so when he does, I pay attention. What exactly did he tell you? Isabel smiled. That you're marrying him out of necessity, not choice. That you are significantly stronger than you appear, and that you need a dress that allows you to wage war while looking like you're going to a wedding. Elena couldn't help the surprised laugh that escaped. He said that? Not in those exact words, but I've known Adrian since he was 17 years old, learning his father's business and hating every moment of it. I know how to translate his requests. Isabel gestured toward a seating area. Sit. Tell me who you are when no one is forcing you to be anything. It was the first time anyone had asked that question since Elena had agreed to this arrangement. She found herself talking about Barcelona, about her gallery, about the art she loved, and the life she'd built before her brothers had destroyed it. Isabel listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a sketchpad. You're mourning, Isabel said finally. Not just the life you lost, but the version of yourself you thought you could become. This dress needs to honor that grief, while also celebrating the woman you're choosing to be now. I'm not choosing anything. Aren't you? Isabel's gaze was penetrating. You could have said no in Miami. You could have let your brothers face the consequences of their choices. But you didn't. You chose to sacrifice yourself to save them. That's not weakness, Elena. That's the most powerful choice you could have made. Now you need to own it. The words hit harder than they should have. Elena felt something shift inside her, some fundamental reframing of her situation. She hadn't been taken. She'd made a choice, a terrible choice, between awful options, but a choice nonetheless. And Adrian was right. She could spend the rest of her life resenting that choice, or she could own it and build something from the wreckage. Show me what you're thinking, Elena said quietly. Isabel flipped her sketchpad around. The dress she'd drawn was stunning. Elegant but architectural, with clean lines and a structured bodice that would make Elena look powerful rather than delicate. The fabric would be silk mikado, she explained, with hand-embroidered details that referenced both Spanish and Italian design elements. Strong shoulders, a defined waist, a skirt that moved like water but held its shape. It's perfect, Elena breathed. It's honest, Isabel corrected. This is a dress for a woman going into battle wearing armor that looks like art. When you walk down that aisle, everyone will see exactly what Adrian saw when he chose you, someone who refuses to break. They spent the next 3 hours on details, the exact shade of white, the embroidery pattern, the way the dress would move. Isabel took measurements with the precision of a surgeon, making notes and adjustments until she was satisfied. 4 days is almost impossible, Isabel admitted as they were finishing. But for Adrian, and for you, I'll make it happen. The dress will be ready the morning of the wedding. Elena wanted to ask why Isabel cared, why she would go to such lengths for a stranger's forced marriage. But something in the older woman's expression stopped her, a sadness that suggested she understood more about Adrian's world than she let on. Thank you, Elena said instead. This means more than you know. Isabel squeezed her hand gently. Survive him, Elena. Adrian is not a bad man, but he is a dangerous one. And dangerous men break beautiful things without meaning to. Don't let him break you. The warning stayed with Elena on the drive back to the penthouse. Victor was silent as always, his eyes constantly scanning the streets for threats. New York rushed past the tinted windows, millions of people living their ordinary lives, unaware of the shadow world Elena was being pulled into. Adrian was home when she arrived, standing in the main living room with Marco and two other men she didn't recognize. They all turned when she entered, conversation dying immediately. Elena. Adrian's voice was controlled, but she caught the edge beneath it. This is Marco, my second, and these are representatives from the Mendez family. The air went cold. Elena looked at the two men, one older, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had seen violence and learned to enjoy it. The other younger, maybe 30, with Raphael's eyes and the same barely controlled fury. Mrs. Cruz, the older man said, his accent placing him somewhere in Central America. Or should I say, soon to be Mrs. Valente. I am Carlos Mendez, Raphael's uncle. This is his cousin, Diego. Elena kept her expression neutral, falling back on years of training in her father's house. Gentlemen, we came to discuss the unfortunate situation that has developed, Carlos continued, his tone pleasant in a way that made Elena's skin crawl. Adrian has taken something that was promised to our family. We're here to negotiate appropriate compensation. I'm not an object to be negotiated over, Elena said quietly. Diego laughed, sharp and ugly. You're exactly that. Your brothers sold you to the highest bidder. Don't pretend this is anything but a transaction. Adrian moved so fast, Elena barely saw it. One moment he was standing calmly, the next his hand was around Diego's throat, slamming him against the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. Choose your next words very carefully, Adrian said, his voice soft and absolutely lethal, because they might be your last. Adrian! Carlos hadn't moved, hadn't even flinched. Violence won't resolve this situation. No? Adrian's grip tightened, and Diego's face was turning red. Your nephew thought he could outmaneuver me. Your family thought they could use marriage as a Trojan horse to infiltrate my organization. You're lucky I'm only taking a bride and not taking heads. Raphael deserves satisfaction. Carlos's eyes were cold. You humiliated him, took what was his. What was his? Adrian released Diego, who collapsed gasping. Elena was never his. She was a bargaining chip in a game your family lost when they decided to betray me. But here's what I'll offer, because I'm feeling generous. He pulled out his phone, typed something, and showed it to Carlos. Whatever was on the screen made the older man's expression darken. That's the evidence I have of your family's treachery. Recorded conversations, financial transfers, communications with my enemies. Enough to destroy your credibility with every family from here to Mexico City. Adrian's smile was razor sharp. Your compensation is that I don't release this information. Your satisfaction is that I let you walk out of here alive. Take it or leave it. The silence was suffocating. Elena watched the calculation happening behind Carlos's eyes, weighing pride against survival, honor against pragmatism. Finally, he nodded curtly. We accept. But Adrian, understand this. The Mendez family has a long memory. Today's humiliation will not be forgotten. Good. Adrian's voice was almost cheerful. Remember it every time you think about crossing me again. Remember what it cost you. And remember that I could have taken so much more. Marco escorted the Mendez men out, leaving Elena alone with Adrian. The violence that had filled the room moments before still lingered, making the air feel charged and dangerous. You didn't need to defend me like that, Elena said finally. Adrian turned to look at her, and she saw something feral in his eyes, something that hadn't quite settled back into civilized restraint. Yes, I did. You're mine now, Elena. Mine to protect. Mine to defend. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects me, and I don't tolerate disrespect. I'm not yours. Legally, in 4 days, you will be. He moved closer, and Elena forced herself to hold her ground. But more than that, you became mine the moment I decided you were worth taking. The Mendez family, your brothers, everyone who sees you now understands that you're under my protection. That means something in our world. It means I'm property. It means you're safe. Adrian's hand came up, cupping her cheek before she could pull away. Do you understand what would have happened if I hadn't claimed you? Your brothers would have sold you to someone else, someone who wouldn't have negotiated terms or respected your autonomy, someone who would have used you up and thrown you away. At least with me, you get a prenup and a gallery and the chance to build something real. Elena jerked away from his touch. Don't pretend you did this for my benefit. I didn't. I did it for mine. But that doesn't make it less true. Adrian's expression shifted to something almost like frustration. Why can't you see that we're both trapped, Elena? You by your family's debts, me by the need to maintain power in a world that sees any weakness as an invitation to attack. We can hate our cages, or we can make them bigger. I'm offering you the second option. By taking away my choice. You never had a choice. Adrian's control cracked, just slightly, letting real emotion bleed through. That's what you don't understand. You were born into this world. You can run to Barcelona, you can change your name, you can pretend you're something other than your father's daughter, but the truth doesn't change. Someone was always going to use you as a pawn. I'm just better than the alternatives. The honesty of it was brutal, and Elena hated that she couldn't argue, because he was right. Her father had been preparing to marry her off before he died. Her brothers had done it anyway. Even if Adrian hadn't intervened, some other powerful man would have seen opportunity in the Cruz family's desperation. I found a dress, she said, changing the subject because she couldn't bear the weight of this truth anymore. Isabel Moreau is making it. Adrian's expression softened fractionally. Isabel is excellent. She'll make you something worthy of the woman you are. And what woman is that? Someone stronger than she realizes. Someone who terrifies me slightly, if I'm being honest. Adrian moved to the bar, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey without asking if she wanted one. You could have collapsed under the pressure, Elena. You could have become bitter and broken. Instead, you're standing here arguing with me, negotiating for space, refusing to simply surrender. Do you know how rare that is? Elena took the glass he offered, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Is that why you chose me? Because you thought I'd fight? Partly. Adrian took a long drink, his eyes distant. But also because I saw something of myself in you. That rage at being trapped by circumstances you didn't choose. That desperate need to build something that's yours, untainted by family legacy. I thought maybe we could understand each other, even if we never liked each other. Understanding isn't the same as consent. No, he agreed. But it's a start. And Elena, whether you believe me or not, I want you to thrive in this arrangement. A resentful, diminished wife serves no purpose. A powerful one who stands beside me because she chooses to, even if that choice is made from limited options, that's worth everything. Elena studied him, trying to reconcile the man who'd just threatened to kill someone for insulting her with the man now speaking about wanting her to thrive. Adrian Valente was a contradiction wrapped in expensive suits and lethal capability, and she was beginning to realize that understanding him might be the key to surviving him. The wedding planner called, she said. Everything is arranged. White roses, classical guitar, bilingual ceremony exactly as I requested. Good. Adrian's phone buzzed and he glanced at it with a frown. I need to handle something. Will you be all right here? Where else would I go? The question hung between them, highlighting the fundamental truth of her situation. She could leave the penthouse, could technically go anywhere in the city, but without Adrian's protection, without his name and resources, she would be vulnerable in ways she was only beginning to understand. I'll be back for dinner, Adrian said, already moving toward the door. We should probably eat together, start getting used to appearing as a couple. He left before Elena could argue, and she found herself alone again in the massive penthouse. She wandered through the space, examining the art on the walls, real pieces, museum quality, chosen with care rather than just for investment value. Adrian had taste, she realized. Beneath the cold calculation was someone who appreciated beauty, who understood the power of visual expression. The library drew her in, walls lined floor to ceiling with books. Not just business texts or legal references, but fiction, philosophy, art history. Elena pulled out a volume on Baroque painting and found margin notes in handwriting she recognized from the prenup, Adrian's precise script, making observations and connections. She was still reading when he returned hours later, the sun having set without her noticing. Adrian paused in the library doorway, taking in the scene of her curled in his chair with his book. "Finding anything interesting?" he asked. Elena held up the volume. "You have good taste, and better commentary. This observation about Caravaggio's use of shadow as metaphor is actually quite insightful." "Careful, Elena. You almost sounded like you were complimenting me." "I'm complimenting whoever wrote these notes. If that happens to be you, so be it." She set the book aside. "You studied art?" "My mother insisted, said that men who only understood money became monsters." Adrian's expression turned distant. She was right, mostly, though studying art didn't prevent me from becoming what I am. "And what are you?" He met her eyes directly. "A monster who appreciates beauty. A killer who understands the value of creation. Someone who exists in the space between civilization and savagery, trying to hold both in balance." The honesty was disarming. Elena found herself seeing Adrian differently, not just as the man who'd taken her freedom, but as someone equally trapped by circumstances and choices that predated both of them. "Dinner?" he offered, extending his hand. Elena hesitated, then took it. His grip was warm, steady, and for just a moment she let herself imagine that this could be something other than a strategic arrangement, that the man who loved Caravaggio and protected her from insults could be someone she might choose, given different circumstances. But circumstances were what they were. And in 3 days, Elena would walk down an aisle toward a future she couldn't quite see yet, bound to a man who saw her as investment, an asset, and perhaps, underneath it all, as something almost like an equal. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as they sat down to dinner and Adrian asked her opinion on the Barcelona art scene, Elena felt something she hadn't expected, curiosity about what they might become to each other, given time and the pressure of surviving in a world that wanted to destroy them both. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was something close enough to matter. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparations that felt surreal in their normalcy. Wedding planners came and went, florists presented arrangements, musicians sent recordings for approval. Elena found herself making decisions about a ceremony that should have been joyful, but instead felt like choreographing her own elegant surrender. Adrian was absent more than present, handling what he vaguely referred to as business complications, with a tension in his shoulders that suggested the Mendez situation was far from resolved. But when he was there, during their now nightly dinners, something unexpected was developing between them. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of wary understanding. They talked about art, about the changing landscape of global power, about everything except the reality of what would happen after they spoke their vows. On the morning of the wedding, Elena woke to find a box on her sitting room table. Inside was a necklace, diamonds and sapphires arranged in a pattern that referenced both the Cruz family crest and something she didn't immediately recognize. The note was in Adrian's precise handwriting. "These sapphires belong to my grandmother. The diamonds I had added to honor your family. You don't have to wear it, but I wanted you to have something that represented both of us, not just me claiming you. The choice, as always, is yours." Elena held the necklace up to the light, watching it catch and fracture the morning sun into 1,000 brilliant shards. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, the design thoughtful in a way that suggested Adrian had spent actual time considering what would matter to her. It was a peace offering wrapped in precious metals, an acknowledgement that this marriage was destroying something she valued even as it created something new. She was still holding it when Isabel arrived with the dress, accompanied by a small army of assistants who transformed Elena's suite into a makeshift salon. The designer took one look at Elena's face and immediately understood. "He gave you jewelry," Isabel said, not quite a question. "His grandmother's sapphires." Elena set the necklace down carefully. "Modified to include my family's symbols." "That sounds like Adrian. Grand gestures that are actually quite personal if you know how to read them." Isabel began unpacking the dress with reverent care. "He's terrified, you know." Elena laughed without humor. "Adrian Valente doesn't get terrified. He's the one who terrifies other people." "He's terrified of failing you." Isabel's tone was matter of fact. "I've known him since he was barely more than a boy, remember? I saw him after his father died, saw him build an empire from grief and rage. He's never let anyone close enough to fail. But you? You matter in a way that makes him vulnerable. And vulnerability is the one thing Adrian has spent his entire adult life avoiding. I'm a strategic acquisition. He said so himself. Yes, he would say that. Isabel smiled sadly. Because admitting that he chose you for reasons beyond strategy would mean acknowledging that he's human underneath all that armor. And Adrian stopped believing in his own humanity a long time ago. Before Elena could respond, the door opened and Sofia appeared, her assistant from Barcelona, looking completely out of place in the elegant penthouse suite. Sofia? Elena was on her feet immediately. What are you doing here? Mr. Valente flew me in. Sofia's eyes were wide, taking in the opulence surrounding them. He said you might want someone from your real life here today, someone who knows you as Elena Cruz, not Elena Valente. The thoughtfulness of it was almost painful. Elena felt her carefully constructed defenses crack slightly. Adrian kept doing this, kept showing glimpses of someone who saw her as a person rather than a possession, who understood what she was losing and tried in his own calculated way to soften the blow. Help me with the dress, Elena said, because she couldn't afford to fall apart right now. We have a wedding to get through. The dress was everything Isabel had promised. When Elena finally stood before the mirror, fully dressed with her hair swept up and minimal makeup that let her natural features speak, she barely recognized herself. The woman looking back wasn't the girl who'd fled to Barcelona or the daughter who'd been sold by her brothers. This woman looked like she could walk into a room full of dangerous men and emerge unscathed. This woman looked like she belonged beside Adrian Valente. The necklace, Sofia said softly, holding it up. It's perfect with the dress. Elena met Isabel's knowing gaze in the mirror. The designer nodded almost imperceptibly, confirming what Elena had already suspected. Adrian had seen the dress design, had commissioned the necklace specifically to complement it. Another grand gesture that was actually deeply personal. Put it on, Elena said finally, surrendering to the inevitability of it all. The weight of it around her neck felt like both a claim and a promise. She touched the sapphires gently, thinking of Adrian's grandmother, wondering what kind of woman she'd been, whether she'd chosen her fate or had it chosen for her. The ceremony was being held in the penthouse itself, transformed by the wedding planner into something intimate and elegant. White roses everywhere, their scent heavy in the air. Classical guitar playing softly from speakers hidden throughout the space. The guest list was tiny. Marco and a few of Adrian's key associates, Mateo and Santiago looking uncomfortable in their formal wear, and a handful of people Elena didn't recognize but who radiated the same controlled danger that surrounded Adrian. Victor appeared at her door precisely on time. Mr. Valente is ready when you are, ma'am. Elena took a final look at herself in the mirror. This was it. The moment where she stopped being just Elena Cruz and became something new, something she couldn't fully predict yet. She thought about running, about calling it off, about choosing her freedom over her brother's lives. But she'd already made that choice in Miami. Everything since then had just been learning to live with the consequences. I'm ready, she said, though she wasn't sure if it was true. The walk from her suite to the main living room felt like miles. Sofia and Isabel followed at a discreet distance, witnesses to this strange ceremony. When Elena finally emerged into the transformed space, everyone turned to look, but she only saw Adrian. He stood at the far end of the room, backlit by floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Central Park like a painting. He'd chosen a dark suit that was somehow both modern and timeless, and when his eyes found hers, something flashed across his face too quickly for her to identify. Appreciation, maybe, or satisfaction, or something more complicated that he immediately buried beneath his usual control. There was no aisle, no traditional processional. Elena simply walked toward him, each step feeling weighted with significance. Her brothers stood off to one side, and she couldn't even bring herself to look at them. This was their doing, their salvation purchased with her sacrifice. Adrian watched her approach with an intensity that made her acutely aware of every detail, the way the dress moved, the sound of her heels on hardwood, the sapphires cool against her skin. When she finally reached him, he extended his hand and she took it, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. You look extraordinary, he said quietly, for her ears only. Isabel outdid herself. You've seen the design. Sketches don't do you justice. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so subtle the others probably missed it. "Thank you for wearing the necklace. It matches the dress. It would have been wasteful not to." Adrian's lips quirked in something that might have been a smile. "Ever practical, Elena. I appreciate that about you." The officiant stepped forward, a judge Adrian had known for years, someone who understood the nature of this union and asked no uncomfortable questions. He began the ceremony in English, the traditional words taking on new weight given the circumstances. When it switched to Spanish for Elena's benefit, she felt something in her chest tighten. This was real. This was actually happening. "Do you, Elena Maria Cruz, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Elena met Adrian's eyes, seeing her own complicated truth reflected there. He knew she didn't want this. He knew she was here under duress. But he was offering her something anyway: protection, resources, a kind of partnership, even if it wasn't the kind she would have chosen. "I do," she said clearly, and felt the words seal her fate. Adrian's vows came in English, his voice steady and sure. When he spoke the words, they sounded less like promises and more like declarations. Statements of intention from a man who always followed through on what he committed to, regardless of the cost. The rings were simple platinum bands, elegant without being ostentatious. When Adrian slid one onto her finger, his touch was surprisingly gentle, at odds with the violence she knew those hands were capable of. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The judge's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You may kiss the bride." Adrian's hand came up to cup her face, tilting it toward him. His eyes asked a question, seeking permission even in this moment, where technically none was required. Elena gave the barest nod, and he leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. The kiss was soft, almost chaste. Nothing like what she'd expected. His lips were warm against hers, the contact lasting only seconds before he pulled back. But in that brief moment, Elena felt something shift between them. An acknowledgement that they were bound now, legally and socially, for better or worse. The small gathering applauded politely. Champagne appeared. Toasts were made. Marco spoke about strength and unity with the knowing tone of someone who understood exactly what kind of marriage this was. Matteo tried to say something about family, but Elena turned away before he could finish, unable to stomach her brother's hypocrisy. "We should eat," Adrian said quietly, his hand at the small of her back, guiding her toward a table that had been set for an intimate dinner. "You need to keep your strength up." The meal was exquisite, course after course of food Elena barely tasted. She smiled at the right moments, responded to conversation when required, played the role of happy bride with enough competence that no one who didn't know better would have suspected the truth. But underneath the performance, she felt numb, disconnected from her own body, as if watching events unfold from a great distance. Adrian's associates left first, offering congratulations that felt more like acknowledgments of a successful business merger. Then the others filtered out until only Sophia and Isabel remained, both women clearly reluctant to leave Elena alone with her new husband. "I'll be fine," Elena assured them, though she wasn't certain it was true. "Thank you both for being here. It meant more than you know." After they left, the silence in the penthouse felt oppressive. Adrian had disappeared into his study to take a phone call, leaving Elena alone with the remnants of the ceremony: wilting roses, empty champagne glasses, the detritus of a celebration that had felt more like a funeral. She found herself in the library again, drawn to the familiar comfort of books. Still wearing her wedding dress, she pulled out the Caravaggio volume and tried to lose herself in Adrian's margin notes, anything to avoid thinking about what happened next. "You should change," Adrian said from the doorway. "That dress is too beautiful to risk damaging." Elena looked up, finding him leaning against the frame, his jacket and tie discarded, shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before, the careful control slipping enough to show the human beneath. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we live with our choices." Adrian moved into the room, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey from the bar cart. "The marriage is legal. Your brothers are safe. Your gallery will receive its funding tomorrow, and you have a decision to make." "What decision?" He handed her a glass. "Whether you spend the rest of your life hating me for this, or whether you find a way to make peace with reality and build something worth having from the wreckage. I can't make that choice for you, Elena. I can only tell you what I hope for. And what do you hope for? Adrian took a long drink before answering. I hope that someday you'll look at me and see a partner instead of a captor. I hope that the intelligence and fire I saw in your photographs translates into someone who challenges me, who makes me better than I would be alone. I hope that we find a way to exist together that doesn't destroy us both. That's a lot of hope for someone who claims to be practical about everything. Yes, he smiled without humor, which tells you how much I've already invested in this working. I don't hope for things, Elena. I plan, I calculate, I execute. But you make me hope, and I'm not sure if that's dangerous or the only thing that might save us both. Elena set her glass down carefully, processing his words. You're afraid. Terrified. Adrian's admission was so quiet she almost missed it. Of failing you. Of becoming my father. Of building an empire but losing my humanity in the process. You represent the possibility of something different, something that isn't just power and violence and endless strategic maneuvering. But I don't know how to be what you need, Elena. I only know how to be what I am. The vulnerability was stunning, completely at odds with the man who'd threatened to kill Diego Mendez 2 days ago. Elena found herself moving toward him without conscious decision, drawn by the rare glimpse of genuine emotion beneath his careful facade. Then don't try to be what I need, she said. Just be honest with me. Always. No matter how ugly the truth is. That's the only thing I require. That you never lie to me, never pretend this is something it's not. Adrian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and drew her closer until they were standing inches apart. I can promise you that. Truth. Always. Even when it costs me. And I'll promise you the same. Elena looked up at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not a monster, not a savior, just a man trying to survive in a world that rewarded ruthlessness and punished weakness. I'll never pretend to feel something I don't, but I'll stand beside you when you need it. I'll play my role. And maybe if we're both very lucky, we'll find a way to make this bearable. Bearable. Adrian repeated the word as if tasting it. That's actually more than I expected. More than I deserve, probably. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing along her cheekbone. Elena should have pulled away, should have maintained the boundaries she'd insisted on. But something had shifted during the ceremony, during this conversation. The lines were blurring between what was forced and what was chosen, between resentment and reluctant understanding. Adrian, she said softly, a warning and a question both. Tell me to stop, and I will. His forehead rested against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. Tell me this crosses a line, and I'll never cross it again. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of him, the solid reality of the man she'd just married. She should say no, should maintain distance and protect herself from the complications that intimacy would create. But she was so tired of fighting, so tired of pretending she could will herself back to a freedom that had never really existed. Don't stop, she whispered, and felt him exhale shakily. The kiss was nothing like the chaste contact during the ceremony. This was heat and need and a desperate kind of honesty that words couldn't capture. Adrian kissed her like he was drowning, and she was air, his hands moving to her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. Elena responded with equal intensity, surprised by her own desire. This wasn't love. They both knew better than that. But it was real, this connection forged from impossible circumstances and unexpected understanding. Her hands found their way into his hair, and she heard him make a low sound of approval. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian's careful control was completely shattered. He looked young suddenly, vulnerable in a way that made Elena's chest ache. I need you to understand something, he said roughly. This changes nothing legally. The prenup stands. Your independence remains yours. But it changes everything else, and we both know it. I know. Elena's hands were still tangled in his shirt, unwilling to let go. I'm choosing this, Adrian. Not because you forced me, not because I have no other options, but because I'd rather face this new reality with you than against you. Something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes. Then choose me again. Choose to stay tonight instead of retreating to your suite. Choose to let this be real, just for a few hours before the world intrudes again. Elena knew she was standing at a precipice. Whatever happened next would fundamentally alter the dynamic between them, would blur lines that could never be redrawn. But she'd spent so long running from difficult truths, so long pretending she could exist outside the reality of who she was. Maybe it was time to stop running. Yes, she said simply. Adrian kissed her again, slower this time, savoring rather than claiming. When he finally pulled back, he took her hand and led her through the penthouse toward his suite. Not hers, she noticed, making this an active choice rather than a passive surrender. His bedroom was surprisingly austere, given the opulence of the rest of the space. Clean lines, minimal decoration, the kind of space that suggested someone who slept but didn't live there. The bed dominated the room, and Elena felt a flutter of nervousness despite her decision. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for," Adrian said, reading her hesitation. "We can just sleep. I just want you close." The admission was so unexpectedly sweet that Elena felt her defenses crumble completely. She turned to him, reaching for the buttons of his shirt with hands that trembled slightly. "Help me with the dress," she said. "I can't reach the closures." Adrian's hands were steady as they worked the intricate fastenings Isabel had designed. The dress pooled at Elena's feet, leaving her in delicate undergarments that suddenly felt far too revealing. But when she looked at Adrian's face, she saw reverence there, not predation. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "I knew you would be, but knowing and seeing are different things." Elena reached for him, suddenly needing the contact, needing the reassurance that this was real and not just another strategic move. Adrian gathered her close, skin against skin, and she felt the tremor that ran through him. What followed was tender in a way that surprised them both. Adrian touched her like she was precious, like she might shatter if he wasn't careful. Elena responded with a passion she hadn't known she possessed, discovering that desire and emotion didn't require love to be powerful. Afterward, lying tangled together in sheets that smelled of expensive detergent and something uniquely Adrian, Elena felt something inside her shift fundamentally. This wasn't surrender. It was choosing to meet reality on her own terms, to find power and agency even in circumstances she hadn't chosen. "Thank you," Adrian said quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "For giving me this. For choosing to stay." "Don't make me regret it," Elena replied, but there was no heat in the warning. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying not to." He pulled her closer, and Elena let herself relax into his warmth. "Sleep, Elena. Tomorrow, the real work begins, learning how to be partners in a world that wants to destroy anything resembling genuine connection." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of Adrian's heartbeat beneath her cheek. She'd married a dangerous man in a ceremony that should have felt like a death sentence. Instead, lying here in the darkness, she felt more alive than she had in years. It wasn't love. It might never be love, but it was real and honest and theirs. And for tonight, that was enough. Sleep claimed her gently, and for the first time since leaving Barcelona, Elena's dreams weren't haunted by the future she'd lost. Instead, they were full of possibilities she hadn't imagined. A gallery that spanned continents, art that changed conversations, and a partnership forged in fire that might just be strong enough to survive the wars that were coming. In the morning, she would wake up as Elena Cruz Valente, bound to a man who saw the world as a chessboard and people as pieces to be moved. But she would wake up clear-eyed and determined, ready to claim whatever power she could carve out from this impossible situation. The war between them hadn't ended. It had simply evolved into something more complex, more dangerous, and infinitely more interesting than either of them had anticipated. And somewhere in the city below, Rafael Mendez was planning his revenge, unaware that the woman he'd lost had just become the most dangerous piece on Adrian Valente's board. The future was uncertain, violent, full of threats they couldn't yet see. But facing it together, Elena thought as sleep pulled her under, might just be survivable after all. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the realization that everything had changed. Adrian's arm was still draped across her waist, his breathing deep and even in sleep. In the harsh light of morning, the intimacy of the night before felt both more real and more terrifying. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, had chosen connection over resistance in a way that complicated everything. She tried to slip out of bed without waking him, but his grip tightened immediately, pulling her back against his chest. "Running already?" His voice was rough with sleep, but there was amusement in it. "I need to think. Think here." Adrian's lips brushed against her shoulder, a gesture of affection that felt dangerously natural. "We have approximately 2 hours before Marco arrives with the security briefing. Spend them with me." Elena turned in his arms, studying his face in the morning light. Without the armor of his usual control, Adrian looked younger, almost vulnerable. "What are we doing, Adrian, really?" "Surviving." His hand came up to cup her face. "Building something that might actually matter." "I don't have better answers than that, Elena. I've never done this before. Let someone close enough to hurt me." "I could hurt you?" Devastatingly. Adrian's eyes were serious. "You're the only person in the world who could completely destroy me, and you don't even realize it yet. That's terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure." Before Elena could respond, his phone erupted with urgent buzzing. Adrian's expression shifted immediately, the vulnerable man disappearing beneath the cold strategist she'd first met. "What?" He answered with clipped authority, already sitting up. Elena watched his face darken as he listened. "When? How many?" "No, lock down everything. I'm on my way." He was out of bed before the call ended, moving with lethal efficiency as he dressed. "Elena, I need you to stay in the penthouse. Don't leave for any reason. Victor will be outside the door." "What's happened?" Adrian paused, and she saw him calculating how much to tell her. "Rafael Mendez made his move. There was an attack on one of my warehouses last night. 3 of my people are dead, another 5 injured. This is war now, and you're the most valuable target he has." Fear crystallized in Elena's chest. "He'll come for me." "Yes, which is why you stay here, where I can protect you." Adrian was already moving toward the door. "I need to handle this. Need to send a message that this aggression won't be tolerated. But Elena, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She thought about lying, about maintaining emotional distance. But they'd promised each other honesty. "I don't know, but I'll try." Adrian crossed back to her, kissing her hard and fast. "That's good enough. Stay safe. I'll be back as soon as I can." Then he was gone, and Elena was alone with the consequences of everything that had happened in the past week. She'd gone from free woman to forced bride to willing partner in less time than it took most people to plan a vacation. And now people were dying because of the choice Adrian had made to take her, because Rafael Mendez's pride demanded blood payment. The morning crawled by. Elena tried to distract herself with work, calling Sophia to discuss the gallery's progress, reviewing budgets and exhibition plans. But her mind kept returning to Adrian, to the warehouse attack, to the reality that her husband, that word still felt strange, was out there doing things she could barely imagine. Marco arrived around noon, his expression grim. "Mrs. Valente, I need to brief you on security protocols." "It's Cruz Valente," Elena corrected automatically. "And what kind of protocols?" "The kind that keep you alive if Mendez escalates." Marco spread a series of photographs across the dining table. Blueprints of the penthouse, escape routes, safe rooms Elena hadn't known existed. "Adrian wanted you to understand the reality of the situation. This building has multiple security layers, but nothing is impenetrable. If they come for you, you need to know what to do." Elena studied the plans, her business training helping her understand the strategic thinking behind each element. "You're saying it's not if, but when." "I'm saying Rafael is desperate, and desperate men make mistakes. But they also take risks that rational people wouldn't. Adrian humiliated him, took you, destroyed his family's credibility. That's a debt that demands payment." Marco's tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing grocery lists rather than potential assassination attempts. "Adrian is handling the offensive response. My job is to ensure you survive long enough for that response to work." How comforting. But Elena forced herself to focus, to absorb the information Marco was providing. Panic wouldn't help. Strategy would. They spent 2 hours going over scenarios, practicing routes, identifying what to do if various alarms triggered. By the time Marco left, Elena felt simultaneously more prepared and more terrified than before. Adrian didn't return until well after dark. When he finally walked through the door, Elena saw blood on his shirt cuff and something dangerous still lingering in his eyes. "Are you hurt?" She was on her feet immediately, moving toward him. "Not my blood." Adrian's voice was flat, empty in a way that suggested he'd done things he didn't want to discuss. "It's handled. Raphael knows the price of attacking what's mine." Elena reached for his hand, feeling the tension vibrating through him. "What did you do?" "What was necessary?" He met her eyes, and she saw the weight of it there, the violence, the choices, the parts of himself he'd warned her about. "I destroyed one of his primary revenue sources. Sent a clear message that every attack on my interests will be met with disproportionate response. It's the only language his family understands." "Will it stop him?" "No." Adrian pulled away, moving to pour himself a drink with hands that trembled slightly. "It will make him more careful, more strategic. But Raphael won't stop until one of us is dead. His pride won't allow it. So I need to make sure I'm the one still standing when this ends." Elena watched him down the whiskey in one swallow, saw the man beneath the monster struggling with what he'd had to do. "Come here," she said softly. Adrian looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. "Elena, I know what you did. I know what you are." She extended her hand. "Come here anyway." He moved toward her like a man in a dream, letting her pull him close. Elena wrapped her arms around him, feeling the tension slowly drain from his shoulders as he buried his face in her hair. "I don't deserve this," he said quietly. "Don't deserve you seeing the worst of what I am and still offering comfort." "Maybe not." Elena's honesty was gentle. "But we're bound together now. Your wars are my wars. Your enemies want me dead just for existing in your orbit. So I'd rather face all of it with you than pretend I can remain separate from the reality of what this marriage means." Adrian pulled back enough to look at her, something like wonder in his expression. "You're extraordinary. You know that?" "I'm terrified and trying not to show it." "That's what makes you extraordinary." He kissed her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that felt at odds with the blood on his cuff. "Most people would have shattered by now. But you're getting stronger, adapting, becoming exactly the partner I hoped you could be." The days that followed fell into an uneasy rhythm. Adrian left early each morning to manage his empire and the escalating conflict with the Mendez family. Elena worked on her gallery remotely, slowly building something that felt like purpose amid the chaos. And at night, they came together in Adrian's bed, finding solace and connection in the darkness. But the violence was escalating. Another attack, this time on one of Adrian's legitimate shipping operations. A car bomb that killed 2 of Marco's security team. Each incident pushed Adrian further into the cold, calculating persona that Elena was learning to recognize as his war face. 3 weeks after the wedding, Elena woke alone to the sound of breaking glass. Her training with Marco kicked in immediately. She rolled out of bed, grabbed the phone from the nightstand, and hit the panic button as she ran for the safe room Adrian had shown her. The penthouse erupted with alarms. Elena heard shouts, gunfire, the distinctive crack of someone breaching the front door. Her heart hammered as she sealed herself in the reinforced room, watching security camera feeds that showed masked men moving through the space with military precision. They were looking for her. Elena watched them search, methodical and thorough, and understood with crystal clarity that Raphael had finally made his most aggressive move. The safe room was designed to hold for hours, but eventually they would find her. Eventually she would have to face whatever they had planned. Her phone buzzed. "Adrian, are you secure?" His voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "Safe room. There are at least 6 of them. Victor and his team are 3 minutes out. Marco is with me. We're 5 minutes behind them. Elena, listen to me carefully. No matter what happens, you stay in that room until you hear my voice. Do you understand? My voice, no one else's. Adrian, promise me." The desperation in his tone cut through her fear. "Promise me you won't take risks. I can't lose you. Not now. Not after everything." "I promise." Elena watched the feeds as the intruders moved closer to the safe room's location. But Adrian, if they breach the door, they won't live long enough to touch you. The absolute certainty in his voice should have been frightening, but instead, Elena found it comforting. 3 minutes, Elena. Just hold on for 3 minutes. The line went dead. Elena watched the feeds, counting seconds, watching masked men search with increasing frustration. One of them started examining the library wall where the safe room entrance was concealed. She saw him find the seam, saw him signal to the others. Then Victor's team arrived like a violent storm. The camera feed showed the kind of choreographed brutality that spoke to extensive training and zero hesitation. The masked intruders never stood a chance. Within 90 seconds, 4 were dead, 1 was wounded and pinned, and the last was running for an exit that Victor blocked with casual efficiency. Mrs. Valente, Victor's voice came through the safe room intercom. It's clear. Mr. Valente is 30 seconds out. You can open the door. Elena's hands shook as she entered the code, but she forced herself to remain calm. The door swung open to reveal Victor, blood spattered across his tactical gear, holding a weapon with professional ease. Are you hurt? He asked. No, I'm fine. Elena stepped out into the library, trying not to look at the bodies visible through the doorway. The one you captured, can he tell us who sent them? Victor's smile was grim. He'll tell us everything we want to know. Whether he survives the telling is another question. Then Adrian was there, bursting through the penthouse entrance with Marco and additional security. His eyes found Elena immediately, and she saw naked relief wash over his face before the mask slammed back down. Clear the bodies, he ordered, never breaking eye contact with Elena. Secure the prisoner. I want to know everything. Who planned this? Who funded it? Every detail. And then I want Rafael Mendez's location. Marco started coordinating the cleanup, but Adrian moved straight to Elena, his hands framing her face as he searched for injuries. You're sure you're not hurt? I'm fine. Scared, but fine. Elena covered his hands with hers. Your safe room worked exactly as designed. They found you anyway, got within feet of you. Adrian's voice was rough, thick with emotion. That's unacceptable. I'm ending this, Elena. Tonight. Rafael wanted war, and I'm going to give him exactly that. Adrian, wait. No. He pulled her close, holding her with a desperation that spoke volumes. I won't wait while someone tries to take you from me. I won't live in a world where every morning I wake up wondering if you'll survive the day. This ends now. Elena understood then what he was planning. Not just retaliation, but complete elimination. Adrian was going to kill Rafael Mendez, probably Carlos and Diego too, anyone in their family who posed a threat. It was the logical response in his world, the only way to ensure permanent safety. Then I'm coming with you, she said. Adrian pulled back, shock clear on his face. Absolutely not. You don't get to make that decision for me. Elena's voice was steady despite her racing heart. If you're ending this, if you're going to do something that fundamentally changes who you are, I need to be there. I need to witness it, understand it, so I can live with the man who comes back. Elena, what I'm about to do? I know what you're about to do, and I'm choosing to stand with you anyway. She met his eyes, letting him see her certainty. We're partners, Adrian. You don't get to protect me from the reality of what that means. Not anymore. Adrian stared at her for a long moment, something like pain and pride warring in his expression. Finally, he nodded. You stay with Marco. You don't engage. You observe only. Agreed? Agreed. What followed was 2 hours of preparation that felt like entering a different world. Adrian's team assembled with military precision, weapons checked, positions assigned, contingencies planned for every scenario. Elena watched her husband transform into something she'd only glimpsed before, a commander who inspired absolute loyalty and fear in equal measure. The prisoner broke within 30 minutes of interrogation. Elena didn't watch that part, didn't need to see what methods Adrian employed to extract information, but she heard the results. Rafael was at a warehouse in Queens meeting with allies to plan the next phase of his campaign. He thought he was safe, protected by numbers, and the assumption that Adrian would be too busy defending his own territory to mount an offensive. He was wrong. The convoy that left the penthouse consisted of 4 vehicles, heavily armed, moving through New York with the confidence of people who owned the night. Elena rode with Marco, watching Adrian in the lead vehicle through tinted windows. She should have been terrified, should have been questioning every choice that had led to this moment. Instead, she felt strangely calm, as if she'd finally stopped fighting reality and accepted the truth of who she'd become. The warehouse was in an industrial area, isolated and defensible. Elena watched through night vision equipment as Adrian's team moved into position, surrounding the building with practiced efficiency. Raphael had perhaps 20 men inside. Adrian had brought 30, better trained and infinitely more motivated. "Last chance to stay in the vehicle," Marco said quietly. "No?" Elena's jaw was set. "I need to see this." Marco handed her a Kevlar vest and earpiece. "Then you stay behind me. Always. If shooting starts, you hit the ground. Understood?" Elena nodded, pulling on the vest with hands that were steadier than she expected. When they exited the vehicle, the night air was cold against her face, carrying the scent of oil and rust and impending violence. Adrian appeared beside her, his expression carved from stone. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." Elena reached for his hand, squeezing once. "End it, Adrian. End it so we can actually live." Something shifted in his eyes. Acceptance, maybe. Or understanding that Elena was choosing to be his true partner in every sense. He kissed her hard, tasting of violence and desperate hope, then released her to Marco's protection. "Move in," Adrian ordered into his radio. What happened next was brutally efficient. Adrian's team breached the warehouse from multiple points, overwhelming Raphael's people with superior tactics and firepower. Elena heard gunfire, shouting, the distinctive sounds of close combat. Marco kept her back, positioned behind cover where she could see but not be seen. The fight lasted less than 10 minutes. Raphael's people were criminals, enforcers, dangerous men who knew violence. But Adrian's team were professionals, trained by military experience and loyal beyond question. The outcome was never really in doubt. When the shooting stopped, Adrian emerged from the warehouse dragging Rafael Mendez by the collar. The man was bleeding from multiple wounds, his face a mask of rage and pain. Behind him, Victor and the others brought out the survivors, Carlos, Diego, and a handful of others who'd surrendered rather than die. "Elena," Adrian's voice was cold, commanding. "Come here." She moved forward on legs that felt disconnected from her body, aware that everyone was watching, that this moment would define something fundamental about her role in Adrian's world. Raphael's eyes found hers, and she saw the hatred there, the humiliation of being defeated while she watched. "You chose wrong," he spat, blood flecking his lips. "He's a monster. You'll learn that eventually." "I already know what he is." Elena's voice was steady, clear. "And I chose him anyway. You lost, Raphael. Not because Adrian was stronger or smarter, but because you made this personal. You let pride override strategy, and that's why you're bleeding on your knees while I'm standing free." Adrian's hand found the small of her back, a gesture of possession and approval both. "You have one chance to end this," he told Raphael. "Swear an oath, binding your family to peace with mine. Accept permanent subordination to Valente interests. Or die here tonight, along with everyone who followed you into this stupidity." Raphael's face twisted with rage. "I'll never—" Carlos's voice cut through the night. "We accept." Raphael's head whipped around. "Uncle, you can't—" "I can, and I am." Carlos's tone was weary, defeated. "You did this, Raphael. Your pride, your need for revenge. Look at what it cost us. Look at our people dead because you couldn't accept reality." He turned to Adrian. "We swear the oath. The Mendez family acknowledges Valente supremacy. This war is over." Adrian studied Carlos for a long moment, assessing truth and sincerity. "The oath is binding for 3 generations. Any violation, any hint of treachery, and I don't just kill the responsible party, I eliminate the entire bloodline. Do you understand what you're agreeing to?" "I understand." Carlos met Adrian's eyes without flinching. "We were wrong to betray you. We're lucky you're offering terms at all." "I'm offering terms because my wife asked me to end this, not extend it into permanent vendetta." Adrian's voice was cold. You have Elena to thank for your lives. Remember that the next time you consider any action against Valente interests. The oath-taking was formal, ritualistic, the kind of ceremony that meant everything in their world. Carlos spoke the words that bound his family to Adrian's, effectively ending Mendez's independence in exchange for survival. Rafael refused to participate, was forced to his knees and held there while his uncle surrendered everything he'd fought for. When it was done, Adrian gave a single nod. Take them. Medical treatment for those who need it, then escort them out of my territory. I don't want to see Mendez faces in New York again. Victor's team moved to comply, hauling away the defeated remnants of Rafael's rebellion. But Rafael himself didn't move, stayed on his knees staring at Elena with something like comprehension dawning. You were never the prize, he said slowly. You were the weapon. He knew you'd be stronger than Maria, knew you'd stand with him instead of weakening him. That's why he chose you. Elena looked down at the man who'd wanted to own her, who'd seen her as property to be acquired. You're wrong. Adrian chose me because he recognized something in me that you never could, that I'm capable of choosing my own fate, even when all the options are terrible. I chose this marriage. I chose to fight beside him, and I'll choose to build something better from all this violence. You lost because you never understood that women can be partners instead of prizes. She turned away, done with Rafael Mendez and everything he represented. Adrian fell into step beside her, his hand finding hers in the darkness. That was quite a speech, he said quietly. It was the truth. Elena looked up at him, seeing the blood and exhaustion and relief warring in his expression. Is it really over? The immediate threat, yes. There will be other challenges, other enemies. But Rafael specifically? That's finished. You're safe now, Elena. As safe as anyone can be in our world. They drove back to the penthouse in silence, both processing what had happened. The sun was rising by the time they arrived, painting the city in shades of gold and pink that seemed too beautiful for the violence of the night. In Adrian's suite, Elena helped him out of blood-stained clothing, running water for a shower that they shared in wordless intimacy. Under the spray, she watched the physical evidence of the night wash away, but she knew the truth would remain. They'd crossed another line together, had stood united in violence, and emerged changed by it. Afterward, wrapped in towels and exhaustion, they collapsed into bed. Adrian pulled Elena against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. I love you, he said quietly. I know I shouldn't, know it makes me vulnerable in ways I can't afford, but I do. I love you, Elena. Everything you are, everything you're becoming. I love that you chose to stand with me tonight. I love that you're strong enough to see me at my worst and not flinch. I love that you made me want something more than power and survival. Elena's breath caught. She'd known what she felt for Adrian was evolving, changing from resentment to understanding to something deeper. But hearing him say it first, hearing the vulnerability in his voice, crystallized everything she'd been afraid to acknowledge. I love you too, she said, the words feeling both impossible and inevitable. I don't know when it happened. Maybe that first night when you were honest about what you wanted from me. Maybe during our dinners when you showed me who you were beneath the monster. But Adrian, I love you. Not the man who bought me from my brothers, but the one who gave me space to choose who I wanted to become. Adrian's arms tightened around her. We're probably insane. Definitely insane. Elena smiled against his skin. Falling in love with the man who forced me into marriage, who exists in a world of violence I barely understand. But here we are anyway. Here we are, Adrian agreed. And Elena, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing this. Choosing me. I know. She tilted her head up to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of promise. Because I'm going to do the same for you. They fell asleep as the city woke around them. Two people who'd found something improbable and precious in the wreckage of impossible circumstances. The future was still uncertain, still full of threats they couldn't predict. But they would face it together, partners in truth now, bound by choice as much as obligation. The gallery in Barcelona would become the first of many, Elena's vision expanding with Adrian's resources behind it. She would become a force in the art world, respected for her eye and her integrity, known as much for her own accomplishments as for being Adrian Valente's wife. Adrian would continue building his empire, But with Elena beside him, he would remember what he was building it for, not just power for its own sake, but the possibility of something better, something that honored the human beneath the monster. Their marriage would never be conventional. There would be challenges, conflicts, moments when the darkness of Adrian's world threatened to consume them both. But they had chosen each other with clear eyes and honest hearts, and that choice would sustain them through everything that followed. 5 years later, Elena would stand in a New York gallery she owned outright, watching Adrian move through a crowd of collectors and artists with the same lethal grace he'd always possessed. But when his eyes found hers across the room, they would soften in a way that only she ever saw. And she would remember that night in the warehouse, the moment she'd chosen to stand beside him, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Love hadn't saved them. They'd saved themselves together by refusing to let circumstance define who they could become to each other. In a world built on violence and strategy, they'd carved out something genuine, something that grew stronger with each choice they made to honor the partnership they'd forged. The pact written in blood had become something more, a covenant of choice, of mutual respect, of two people who'd looked at their worst options and decided to build their best life from them. And in the end, that was worth more than any freedom Elena had imagined in Barcelona, more than any empire Adrian had built on his own. They had each other. They had truth. And they had a future they were writing together, one imperfect, beautiful, violent, tender day at a time. The story could have ended in tragedy, two people destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. Instead, it ended in transformation. The woman who'd been sold becoming the partner who chose to stay. The monster who'd claimed her learning to become the man who earned her love. In Adrian's world, that was as close to a happy ending as anyone could hope for. And for Elena and Adrian both, it was more than enough.